Well, good morning to all of you who have been able to join us and those who are going to watch this on their own time. We are finding that now with this series of investor forum topics that over 150 to 200 individuals are actually watching this separate off of our YouTube channel afterwards, and then another 100 or so are downloading the videos to watch as well. So thank you all who've been able to join us this morning. I'm Richard Seeline with the Resilience Innovation Hub. We've got a great group of folks with us this morning. Let me just remind those who are joining us for the first time a little bit about the goals of the Investor Forum. As some of you are acutely aware, we went from a 2-day in-person 40 speakers and looking at 200 registrations as we often do, to having to now make this much more of a virtual setting until we look to doing in-person gatherings in later April and May, which you'll begin to hear about. So it's been an interesting challenge of all things to get alignment of schedules. So I appreciate your patience with us. Goals of the forum, obviously are to really connect the best thinking, the best ideas about pre-disaster and risk mitigated resilience, align that thinking between investors, technology, founders, project development, in a sense, the marketplace, and then actually begin to move the needle around a number of these projects and opportunities wherever they are in the United States. We call this future-proofing America, although this will obviously have an impact and reach internationally. You all know as well, because many of you have had to live through this, that the United States continues to be plagued, as other places, with billion-dollar disasters, one after another. And frankly, 2022 won't be that different. So this goes from fires to spills and leaks, floods, snow and ice, still dealing with the pandemic as we are. So, the drivers of our forum and the work of the Innovation Hub, but most importantly, who you'll hear from today, our Collaboratory network partners, is to address these types of issues around these disasters. I think I've mentioned over and over again, resources are not the issue anymore. There are abundant resources. You've got the initiatives from the White House to different parts of agencies and programs throughout the United States. The academic institutions are already identifying where all of these resources can come from. And this is an example of the abundance of the resources that are available to do resilience. But one of the challenges is they're fragmented, they're not connected, they have sometimes competing criteria. And so one of the potential outcomes of our discussion today on this roundtable and future parts of the Investor Forum is to figure out how to align resources for technology companies, for communities, industry along the way. As I've also shared, the reinsurance industry announced last July that in 2022, over $1.26 trillion of bond capacity will be up for use in 2022. Resilience bonds, private activity bonds. So that's one angle of financing. We have well over 550 plus billion of federal infrastructure, not just the 1 billion, but tied also with the 22 agencies that have their traditional funding and financing. And then we have $12 trillion plus of generational wealth that's beginning to change hands through social impact, philanthropy, that align with all of what we're talking about. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our lineup, and they each will introduce themselves, take a few minutes at at first. Some of them will share some presentation materials. But we've got a great lineup, starting with Melissa Meeker, who has been directly involved in the public water systems throughout her career and is running one of the most unique institutions and organizations with 30 plus public water utilities. And behind Melissa will be Jack, who will introduce his perspective and work at the state level and working with some of his partners, not only in Georgia, but throughout the United States. Our good friend, Charlie Sidori in Boston with Insure, which, Charlie, I didn't mean to limit you nor Paul or anybody's impact to a region, but I want to at least give a sense that, we're starting with Boston and New England, but working out. And the same thing, Paul Robinson with our friend in Norfolk, because these are national opportunities, national projects. So with that, Melissa, I am going to keep this up on the screen. And then when we go to the next presentation, we'll be able to pull up that information. But Melissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Richard, for having me. Always a pleasure. My name is Melissa Meeker. I'm the CEO of the Water Tower, which is an innovation center in Beaufort, just northeast of Atlanta. Just a little bit about myself, so you see where I'm coming from. 30 plus years experience in the water industry. I have worked for state government and regulatory and resource management. I ran the South Florida Water Management District, Deputy Secretary of DEP in Florida, run a research foundation, international association that looked at a specific water treatment process. So a lot of experience in the space in public, private, and a compliance engineering firm, Tetra Tech. So done a little bit of everything. And this center really, I think, draws the best pieces of each of those experiences and brings it to one very unique facility. And we are trying to further the water industry and linking manufacturers with service providers, with water utilities. The awesome thing about the water industry is that we're essential, obviously, but nobody thinks about it, right? So you have that buried or hidden infrastructure. And until something goes wrong, i.e. you go to the faucet and you turn it on and you try and flush your toilet, you never really think about the water industry. But I do think that as an industry, we're at a tipping point, and there's a few drivers to that. The gray tsunami, an industry that has a significant portion of its workforce at or near retirement. We are struggling to attract the new generation. We're hoping for a resurgence of the understanding of the importance of trades in the US, but for right now, we're struggling. And part of that is because utilities are very conservative, and the new generation is tech savvy, and our utilities may not be as tech savvy. So you've got some some differences there that I think we, again, are at a tipping point and can address. Climate change is driving a lot of things. We have a more enlightened generation. So we need to be more connected and more transparent as water utilities. So a lot of opportunity there. And certainly utilities are data rich, but not necessarily data smart. So there's a huge opportunity on the smart tech side to help us be more efficient and effective, more in predictive analytics, and better service providers to our customers, which is a very smart public. So we have, as I mentioned, this unique facility, really bringing together all aspects of the industry, focusing on R&D activities, as well as demonstrations, active demonstrations of new technology. And the beauty of the center is our combination with the workforce development training, because now we have the workforce coming through the facility and being exposed to new technology, seeing in the master control room what smart analytics can show them about their plant operations. So it's that soft sell of this next smart tech that we're really trying to demonstrate and maximize. So it's exposure to new technology, it's enhanced training of the staff by incorporating those technologies into their boring classroom studies, getting them out into the field, getting their hands on pieces of equipment, and playing with those systems to get more comfortable with it. Fantastic facility in that we're adjacent to one of the highest treated wastewater facilities on the Eastern Seaboard. So we have access to their flows, we have access to their facilities, the distribution system, the collection system, pump stations, everything you can think of that a utility would deal with. We can place demonstrations in, we can verify new technologies using real data. So the center provides all of that. And again, bringing people in for conferences, meetings, workforce training to expose them is the beauty of the center. So really happy to be here. Believe in, Richard, what you are trying to accomplish and your vision of pulling us all together. So just happy to participate in the conversation.
Well, thank you, Melissa. And we're going to come back to you on a couple of parts about the demonstrations and the technology, but I also know that you're going to be cutting the ribbon soon.
Yes.
Finally, what date is the ribbon cutting? In April, right? It's just around the corner.
Actually, the ribbon cutting is March 30th. So we'll be moving in the week before that, hopefully. Okay. But we already have ongoing demonstrations and workforce training going on. So just excited to have a beautiful building behind me up and running in another couple of weeks.
Cool. We'll come back to you. Jack, thank you for joining us from your great perspective. I promise, Jack, that I will learn how to spell your name. I either drop the W or drop an L, but given the last name is C-Line, trust me, I am empathetic. So Jack, if you'll unmute and share your thoughts about what's happening with the state of Georgia and from your colleagues and perspectives across the country.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And before I go any further, just quite frankly, Melissa's work I think makes us proud, right? Being not too far down the road, and I've been out to the site when it was much earlier in the process, and having been to the plant in my own academic days as on a field trip, it is something to be proud of. Like Melissa said, maybe it's not things we think about as sort of consumers, but it really is a big deal. So congratulations for that effort. But I'm here representing myself, but as well my employer, the Georgia Emergency Management Agency. So for those who may not be as familiar with emergency management in general, I think everyone still is familiar with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So our agency would essentially be the equivalent at the state level. Much of our funding is funds that result from FEMA itself. So our work to follow the theme of pre-disaster and risk mitigation, that's really the world in which we operate. Our overall mission, pretty straightforward, the protection of life and property. So who could argue with that? Really where we focus a lot of our intention is risk reduction projects and planning at sort of what we refer to as community lifeline. So like Melissa talked about, obviously, water, but we sort of talk about food, water, and shelter, energy, transportation, communications. What are those services that need to be delivered consistently, effectively to ensure quality of life? And particularly my work, how that is impacted by natural hazards, right? Not to throw any shade at our friends in the insurance sector, but they talk about primary and secondary perils. Well, in the world of emergency management, it's all a peril, right? If you're out doing swiftwater rescue, it doesn't really matter if that was the secondary peril in the NatCat model, right? But I say that in all in good fun, but that's sort of the space that we operate. Though I did make that reference to swiftwater rescue, for example, much like that pre-disaster and risk mitigation slide we saw earlier, we really are in this sort of upstream location where we don't want to live in response and recovery. That's a tough way to make a living. You're putting additional lives at harm when you're trying to protect life and property in that way. So we really are looking at this as an opportunity to just lessen the risk profile in our state. Sort of the biggest activities that we're involved with in terms of natural hazards would be flooding, and then sort of high wind / storm events, right? So we can see how tornadoes and hurricane from a wind event, obviously hugely important to the insurance sector. Energy interruption in those wind events as well, a lot of hardening there. So that's really where we operate. We have a really fun sort of client base, we think, to work with. We have about 700 or so communities with land use authority in the state. And so those are from, city of Atlanta, big enough to host the 96 Olympics, to Santa Claus, Georgia, real place, couple hundred people. And they're really all on our books as a legitimate client. So that, as I said, that makes it a lot of fun. But to Richard's earlier point on the fragmentation and really what is the point of sale on this supply that is no longer really the issue. It's what does that supply look like at the point of sale with a local government who sees a lot of zeros but isn't really sure where to go next. So that's what I look at as both the challenge and the opportunity. And I definitely look forward to hearing from Charlie and Paul as well. And so wanted to say hello to those guys as well. So thank you, Richard.
Jack, thank you. And we're gonna come back and talk about some of the specific elements of where you all are seeing some of the technology drivers and kind of use cases in a little bit. Charlie, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen, and that way you can hopefully do what you need to do to pop your presentation up, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. And I was going to give Jack some grief for throwing shade my way, but to be honest, my slide totally supports what he said. So
Right.
I'll get to that in a second, but just quickly, Charlie Sidori, I'm the executive director of Insure. Insure is a nonprofit, and our mission is to foster innovation in insurance and risk management. And my background is I spent 25 years in the insurance carriers, mostly on the property casualty side, followed by 10 years working on startups out of a place called Cambridge Innovation Center. And 2 years ago, we launched Insure out of Cambridge Innovation Center. Cambridge Innovation Center is an incubator. They run about 1 million square feet around the globe, and they build innovation hubs around it. And we're one of 8 with our focus on insurance. They have others focused on a number of different things. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight is there's a lot going on in the insurtech space. And I think last year was a record year in insurtech investment. And I think it was over 15 billion, maybe 16 billion. And if you peel back that onion, there's this thing called the protection gap, which a lot of you I'm sure know about. But the protection gap is essentially that difference between what is insured and the actual economic losses that occur. So, the part that Jack was talking about is losses happen and somebody's got to take care of them. That protection gap is the part that gets landed on policyholders or local governments to handle, and it's growing. And part of the reason we think it's growing is although there's more money than ever that's been going into innovation of insurance product and services, if you really look at the pie of where the money's going, it's not going to new products. It's going to selling existing products. So like 40% of the money is just how do we sell our existing products to the world? How do we get what we have out? And a bunch of it's going to underwriting. And underwriting sometimes results in more coverage, but a lot of times it results in we're scared about apparel and we're going to pull back. So it doesn't necessarily update or improve coverage. It changes kind of how they're deployed sometimes. We really think that a root cause of the protection gap, which in and of itself causes, populations to be uncovered and be more vulnerable to the impacts of all the disasters Richard talked about. But we also think it's a missed opportunity. We think if you innovate products and services, you can do it in a way that not only delivers coverage to people that need coverage, but also incorporates kind of these resilience philosophies and acts as a multiplier or a mechanism that promotes improvements in resilience and also transition to a low carbon economy. Insurance products can be innovated working backwards from those two goals. and develop to provide to give the incentives for the world to kind of make a more resilient, infrastructure, and also make this transition so that to address the root cause. And that's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on trying to foster innovation, focused on these issues that closes the protection gap and drives those two goals. And if you look at, like, I put this quote in here from McKinsey, it says, if you really peel back, the industry grew, revenues grew, everybody's like, yay. But if you really peel back that, it's mostly from price increases. So it's not from new products, because we're not really building new products per se. Only 10% of the R&D or the InsurTech investment is going to new products. And just quickly, one more stat. If you look at just like corporate R&D, the financial services sector, which includes both banking and insurance. I don't have data broken out just by insurance, but that sector is 8.5% of the economy. And it's only like 1.7% of R&D spent in the United States. So it's dramatically, whether you look at InsurTech kind of investment going in, not being focused on products, or like just corporate R&D budgets, it's not trying to solve the problem. And we think that needs to be highlighted. And we take it upon ourselves to say, like, put money in here and we'll do it right. We'll build things that promote the common good, the things we need to do, but also are viable products that can make money and actually grow the premium base for the industry. So that's my kind of story.
You want to share your next slide? Because I do think it gives a little basis of kind of what y'all are working on and how your ecosystem around and how this ultimately plays out for all of.
And the insurance industry has a long history of addressing societal risks. And I think about the UL a lot. Underwriter Laboratories started in 1893 when electricity had a 0% market share. And the industry formed Underwriter Laboratories to solve the problems, the risk problems related to electricity before things happened. And we think now is a time to really start looking at these climate issues, both the impacts and the root causes. And we think that the model to do that is, the approach is like, well, UL, kind of the industry got together, partnered with others to solve the problem, but we think it needs to be updated for the 21st century. And we think an ecosystem model, and that's what Richard's building. We're part of his ecosystem. The whole resilience innovation hub we think of as part of our ecosystem. And we think the most important aspect of it is that I get to work with, like, everybody on this panel who I have very different background from, and who have very different sets of experience and expertise, and the ability to collaborate across these traditional boundaries to solve problems together. And in our world, that means delivering new ventures, which ultimately deliver the outcomes that we're trying to get. And if you look at this ecosystem model, it's really important at that demonstration stage that Melissa was talking about, because the investment is a little skittish to come in. So if we can kind of prove things out, and we've shown, and a lot of research has shown that, like, a dollar going into these kind of early stage demonstration projects via ecosystems, you can easily get to like 2x investment of entrepreneurial talent to participate easily. I think that's a low estimate. And then as you prove them out, you can leverage a 10x of investment following on as you kind of de-risk the projects and prove out the projects. And we think this model is a really, it's a powerful model to make sure that you showed how much funds are available out there, but nobody wants to to invest funds that are not used wisely. And what we're trying to do is say, we're going to kind of provide this discipline around using it smart, collaborating, doing kind of test and learn approaches to deliver these outcomes that we all need to work together to deliver.
Perfect. That's a great segue. We'll come back to a couple of things you raised, but let me segue now to Paul Robinson and the fantastic work, Paul, that you're doing in Norfolk. I think you have the ability to pop your slides up if you want to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. And I'm honored to be part of this panel with a great group of people. And Charlie, you teed up a lot of what I'm about to say here pretty well. And so pleased to be following. Let me share a screen. I've got a couple of slides just to give you a little background on who we are and how we operate. We are a nonprofit organization located in Southeast Virginia. We were originally funded out of a HUD grant of $5 million with a state match of an additional $5 million. And just to cut to the chase here, we have developed a model that can accelerate innovation and business growth around cheaper innovations to solve coastal communities' resilience challenges. And I just want to give you a little bit of background on what that model is, how it's been used before, and what our outcomes have been, and where we're going on the on our next steps. I think it follows on from the previous panelists. We've developed this model. We're a collection of 6 cities down in Southeast Virginia. We're located in Norfolk, but we also have Virginia Beach, Hampton, Portsmouth, and a number of other cities. We're on the coast. We have a major port, major naval base, and we're able to use this region as a test facility, because we have every problem that a coastal community has in terms of sea level rise and aging infrastructure, etc. So we built this model in which we can identify the problem. The folks that work in the cities and the residents, they're really good at identifying the problems. They don't necessarily know the good solutions, and there's plenty of traditional solutions out there, but they can definitely describe and identify what the problems are to the community. We source these problems out to the global community looking for solutions. So we don't source what the solution is, although we can do, but we request solutions that have a technical capability and as well as a business capability. So we want these, what we fund, to actually be part of a growing business. Typically, we fund between about $250,000 and $300,000 to find these solutions. We bring the company in, we work with the cities, we test them, we deploy them. These are actual demonstration, these are pilot projects. Our funding is catalytic funding, which takes the ideas, the technologies out from the lab or the initial prototype stage to the customer stage. Success for us is further investment. It's paying customers for the solution and going off to other larger cities, larger markets, while still solving our problem here. Often the company needs help in business development, understanding who their customer is, what they're selling, how they're paying for it, how they're charging, all that, and how to grow, all that sort of stuff. We help them with that. We give them some business assistance. And of course, we provide them with the catalytic funding, which has been very important. We've been going for about 4 years. Just in summary, we've launched 26 technologies that are currently, most of them are currently operating and being tested in our local area with other customers and other cities starting to get involved. We have deployed $4 million, just over $4 million in catalytic funding to these companies. We just closed 2 challenges that we are judging this month. So we're going to be adding another $1.2 million on top of that, and another 10 or so technologies for addressing further urban and rural problems. We've created over 157 jobs. Some of the companies are actually workforce development jobs, which has helped out an awful lot in the region, especially after COVID. And finally, our companies have raised $32 million of further investment, partly based on the work they're doing with us, and partly their products are just really good and really needed. And so this is an example where the city wanted, and people in the city wanted to be able to get around the city when it's raining heavily, there's flooding, there's tidal flooding, a very dynamic environment. So we ran a challenge, our urban mobility challenge, where in fact we were looking for the solution. We wanted real-time flooding to be brought into Waze. So as customers, drivers can get around town and be navigated around the very dynamic flooding environment. So you see here, we found a company, FloodMap. We ran the competition. FloodMap came through with their models. This is a picture here, an aerial view of a flooding map in downtown Norfolk. The blue is where the flooding is. This is a real life flooding environment. And this is actually inside my car with Waze on, and that little blob there is the dot that came through Waze warning the drivers of flooding ahead. And the next stage of this will be to build in the capability into this Waze product of actually routing cars around that, so as they don't end up facing the flooding here, and they'll know to get around that with better knowledge. So that's an example of how we wanted a solution. We found a company, and we worked very closely with the city as a test environment to demonstrate the capability. And this is the first time that this has been done anywhere. And Waze has been a very great partner for us. This is a bit of a close-up. I really don't know what these other icons are, but that's a flooding icon right there. And that shows up in real time in your car, as well as an oral alert. This is the most important slide, my email address. I'm going to stop sharing here because one thing I just want to touch on before we go. Our next challenge, which we are launching right now, or this is sort of a soft launch. We're just rolling it out, but I'm bringing it up here because I really would welcome input and help. We are looking to address one of the biggest problems for residents and property owners in coastal communities. That's the cost, flood-related insurance premiums. Trying to get these under control. They keep on going up. People they don't understand, and there are not products available to them to understand how to control these costs, as well as on the other side of things to help control the cost, the number, and the amount of claims. And we need to understand better what sort of insurance products are needed. We've funded plenty of mitigation capabilities for infrastructure and for buildings, but how does that all get put together to help bring down the cost of insurance premiums to the residents, and also ease the burden on insurance capabilities like NFIP, insurance sources like NFIP. So I want to reach out to this community. It's a great community that Rich has put together to help me understand. I'm an aerospace engineer, so I run out of steam very quickly with insurance. But I really want to talk to the people who are involved in this ecosystem to help really understand what the problems are. We have $500,000 of money to put behind this challenge to find and fund new ideas and demonstrate them here in Norfolk. We hope to be able to increase that amount to over $1 million over the next few months. So we welcome your inputs, and I would love to talk to you folks just to get your ideas and help guide us to do something that can be useful to all of the community. Thank you, Richard. Thanks for the opportunity to present today too. Thank you.
Great, Paul. Thank you, Charlie. Let me come to you in a second, but let me leverage kind of the reason why this set up in this order. Jack, I want you to jump in a few as well with a question from the perspective of a public agency. But you've just now heard from Melissa, Charlie, and Paul about the role of demonstration, piloting in the field, in a real world setting. And from a investor perspective, and that investor, Melissa, I think you and I have talked about this. We're not talking about just solely the insurance companies. We're not talking just solely about private equity or venture funds. We're talking about procurement decision makers on the public sector side. So I'd like y'all very quickly, Melissa, you, Paul, and Charlie, if you would, from a demonstration perspective, think of this as why a technology company needs to jump into scaling quickly. Is that one of the benefits of doing a demonstration? So talk a little bit about the benefits of demonstrations for a technology or a product company, and then talk about it from an investor or procurement decision maker. So Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question, Richard. I think the benefit to, I mean, you know, utilities and user groups have been using pilots all the time, right?
Right.
But that pilot is for a specific client for a specific purpose. And I think one of the benefits to a demonstration facility that's open to the public or the rest of the universe is that we actually promote the results of that. Not saying good or bad, but saying, hey, the demonstration's here, you want to see it, come look at it. So you have a much broader audience. The cool thing about the demonstration facilities is that they use real data, unlike you know, someone manufacturing something or writing software that may not have access to live data, real data. So those things we have access to that they're not going to have unless they go to a single customer. So it's just provides a lot of benefits, I think.
Let me play off of that, and then Charlie and Paul, you know, as you're formulating your response, I think the thing that you just also mentioned that all of y'all have mentioned is this is aggregating a lot of potential end users to see at one time the outcomes and the use. So Charlie, you had your hand up, but so I don't want to lose your previous thought, but also, you know, let's talk about benefits to the technology company and to the investor as well.
And I can weave them together because I think it makes sense. You know, I think the value of a demonstration project is probably, it is magnified if you actively think about it as a portfolio of projects, because a lot of these things, there aren't silver bullets. And I'll think about like Paul's kind of challenge around, you know, flood and insurance and the cost. It's a perennial thing. It's totally in our radar. And you know, we don't have a project that is going to fix it, but we are working with, and we have things in our pipeline that are like, and if you think back to what I said about the protection gap, a chunk of that protection gap is flood. And if you can, and we're working with a company in our pipeline that does micro insurance, it's parametric and it's based on rain. It doesn't solve the whole flood problem, but it does solve a little piece for a portion of the people affected. And it's the most vulnerable people who need to just have enough money that they can respond and get out. Yeah. And so I think the power of demonstration projects is doing one does de-risk the project. You know, just like Melissa was saying, you have pilots in order to test and learn and minimize the risk. But approaching it from a portfolio, the learnings start to multiply and accelerate. And you can also target the learnings on, you know, we're targeting it on kind of closing that protection gap. Paul's targeting it on, you know, his priorities around coastal. So, you know, each of us managing that portfolio of demonstration projects and then collaborating where there's overlap becomes a powerful accelerator that de-risks that whole big bucket of money that you talked about, that is saying, you know, they're always skittish. The people with the money are like, well, we don't want to waste it because we'll either lose money if we're an investor, or we'll have the public after us if we're, you know, using public funds. So I think the more you can de-risk these things, show value at that portfolio level, gives you more leeway to do really more kind of experimental things at a project level that can have big payouts long term.
Paul, connect that into, I think, the uniqueness of starting, and Charlie, you do this, and Melissa, I'm sure that the water tower does this, but Paul, by putting a grand challenge out there as a part of a demonstration, you're not trying to define the specific parameters of the solution. You're really trying to say, here's really what the problem statement is, right?
Absolutely. So I'll give you like a 15-second story about how we got to our model and in relation to these pilot and demonstration projects. In my previous life, when I had my company, we were developing and commercializing technologies for the airline industry. And a lot of that was R&D and that sort of thing, but it really only became valuable and useful and relevant when we took it to an airline and they actually put it in their operation, and they were able to tell us, look, this doesn't work, this works, or why don't you try this? That was invaluable. That to a small tech company is gold. That's what we've replicated here for these companies. So they can come in here, they can work with our stormwater department and the city and the community and the emergency management services and get that sort of input. And that is so critical to actually become operationally relevant, as well as understanding the value of the product and how to roll it out. So that's the basis of how we help these companies. That's why we want to make sure they've got a business plan there, because otherwise we're blowing the money and it's onto an R&D project. But it's so important to have these pilots and to get the operational input and experience that we can get from the city and the communities here. And by putting some of that catalytic money out there, either as part of a grant or some sort of a loan, a revenue-based loan, then we can stimulate new ideas that are past the back of the envelope stage, but are ready to go in a real life environment. So it's so critical.
So let me again play off of what Paul you just said, and Jack, call on you. So Jack, one of the challenges is, and this is not to take away from entrepreneurs and innovators and inventors, all right, but one of the realities in any area of technology and innovation, but specific to the area that we're focused on, which is, disaster and risk mitigation, there are a lot of people running around with hammers trying to find nails, meaning that there are a lot of people with great ideas, but they really are not ready for the market. So you're sitting at, an office of emergency management, whether it's state, county, or city, and you got all these people come in and, Jack, I can solve this problem, right? How do we, from your perspective and your colleagues' perspective, as you've seen this unfold, doesn't it make sense for the market, the end user market, especially offices of emergency management, insurers, others? How do we best connect the dots on these demonstration and market parameters and encourage the investor, whether it's a procurement decision maker or not? So give me your thoughts. Am I making sense? What I'm saying is, how do we bridge this?
Absolutely. So I think, Charlie made a really good point, right? In terms of saying, the public sector, sort of this procurement officer, by his or her very nature, is likely to be pretty risk averse, right? That, the product they never bought doesn't hurt them versus making an investment and it not working out in the eyes of the community. That's the failure, right? So that there is sort of a barrier to entry there. But when, I think on the investor side, if we do have the proof of concept, now we're sort of really in a meaningful way talking about the total addressable market, right? Because when in my world, I gave that example earlier of Atlanta down to Santa Claus. Well, what is the real kind of total addressable market there, given the product that me as an entrepreneur I'm looking to offer? But I think the piece that is the most meaningful, or the advice that I would give, is it's easy to have the conversation with, since we've been talking about flood today, I'll keep it sort of flood centric, but it's fairly easy to get the city engineer on board. It's fairly easy to get the public works director on board. He or she understands the ramifications of flood kind of as an operational reality, right? But I think the real question comes to, okay, who is sort of the sort of the C-suite, if you will, at the community level? Who's that executive officer, the procurement officer, who's making the decision to cut the check, right? Because everybody has flooding issues, right? There's no public works director in the country who says, no, I'm good, I have everything I need, right? Everybody would be interested in more, but it ultimately comes down to is, you know, how are we going to pay for it, right? And I think part of that is being corrected in terms of, you know, between the federal funding and the finance opportunities that are there. So I think that side's coming together. But in addition to the how, right? If that's coming together, the why, right? Why is this better than perhaps a zero cost alternative that I'm doing right now? Because again, there's always, unfortunately, the cost of doing nothing is real, but not necessarily measured in the same way the procurement would be.
Right. You just raised something, and it ties to one of our attendees today, Eleanor Kitzman, who has been, if not one of the only, but a small handful of individuals that have been a state insurance commissioner in 2 different states. But one of the things that I think we need to really discover about investment, there can be a direct investment of dollars, but there also can be market incentives and I have raised this issue about that the greatest insurance driven innovation is the automotive industry and the automotive insurers. In this case, what Eleanor is, you know, really raising is that if the mortgage industry would require flood insurance to be, you know, truly purchased, all right, and, you know, really force the issue, then you would end up having the requirements for mitigation, you know, around the home, all right, whether it's the roof or the foundation. I think that's true for all of what we're talking about is how do we bring mortgage companies, mortgage bankers, how do we bring others who at the end of the day, by what we're talking about in the way of innovation, we are reducing loss claims, we're reducing the loss of the assets. So Paul, you know, give me your thoughts, and then Charlie and, you know, Melissa, how do we bring these other players to the table who have a measurable impact by what we're doing?
So that's a really good question. I think that's where we are. What I'm trying to do is to create the opportunity to try some of these things out, bring them to the city, bring them to the residents, and let's stand them up. Let's see if they really work. Let's right. Demonstrate them. So that I would hope that this stimulates some people to start to think, and we can provide a test bed of whatever's needed in a coastal community to try and evaluate these things.
Well, and Paul, you've been very humble that the region that you sit in is not only some beautiful historical, lands and infrastructure. You know, you also happen to have a little thing called the Atlantic Fleet just down the road. So yeah. I think your perspective as well should be noted, that we're talking about a wide variety of different assets and infrastructure and end users, right? Melissa, let me, the public water utilities. I think we all got to admit, everybody is risk adverse in some form or another. All right. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to lose your reputation. All these, appropriate things. But Melissa, as you've worked now with public water utilities, and especially with what the water tower is, we did this survey of utility resilience. Kind of reflect back on that survey, and how do we now connect what the water tower is doing, where we can bring technologies and investors to the table, but how do we really address this issue of risk, adversity? Great, thank you. You're on mute.
I just figured that out. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just going to show a couple slides because I think it talks to what you're talking about. Richard and I partnered on a utility survey with some funding from the Black and Beach Foundation. This isn't all of the survey results. I'm happy to share everything if you have an interest, but I did want to hit on a few things. No surprise that a lot of the disasters that everyone has mentioned are on this list, but there's also a bunch of man-made ones too. So just to, we have a larger challenge than just climate change, When we asked the utilities what their biggest challenges were, because I think this will drive where our new technologies and solutions should come from, communication was a key one, just better ways to get the information out there, faster real-time data, those kinds of things, access to emergency equipment. What I've found really interesting is now that you've been through these challenges and these disasters, where are you putting your efforts in the future? And thankfully, they're making sure their CIP programs address resiliency. So again, being proactive in how we design things, not just repairing what was damaged or making the system more resilient. Incorporating smart technologies, not only in their new projects, but actually going back and retrofitting old projects, which I think is critical. And then what kind of data insights do they need? Just another point of reference as we look at new technologies, that predictive forecasting, monitoring, everything, no surprises here, but good to get input from 50 utilities across the country on where they're thinking about the future and the things that they're worried about.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry. No. You know what? The next slide is really getting to one of the things I was going to ask you about, and that is that the survey really did produce a menu, kind of from the reverse pitch perspective, right?
Yep.
Of the utilities coming forward and saying, don't bring us what we don't need. This is what we do need.
Exactly. And I mean, the list just speaks to itself. That smart metering at the individual household, but also, within the system itself, real-time meter reading, tools that the public can use to know if there's a problem, solar backup power. Texas brought that into light, certainly. Communications capabilities. Again, what if, it's great to go all smart tech, but what do we do when the power grid goes down and you don't have that smart tech? So you've got to have, resiliency across the entire system to handle all that. Emergency alert systems, all the different things that we can think of. So we'll continue to increase dialogue with utilities to get their feedback to help drive where innovation's going in the future, and maybe bring people in from other industries that they've had, really successful products in, and tie it to the water industry.
Keep this up here for a second because I want to leverage, all right? Because I think it's also a part of what we've just heard, Charlie and Paul as well, whether it's a grand challenge or it's the, blue sky to blueprint approach that Insure takes. I think what I am, hoping a takeaway from this panel is for these strategic partners of the network to be able to actually quantify and qualify where the demand is coming from, and so that we are not wasting entrepreneurs' time, and we are not wasting the investor confidence in the potential market use of the product. I mean, at the end of the day, connecting the entrepreneur, tech founder, and the investor, what we need to do is leverage, right, this means of convening market end users, observers. And so I think, again, Melissa, what you've shown here can be extrapolated, so to speak, out to a lot of other industries, infrastructure, in this case. So let me, I know that we're getting a good dialogue in the chat. Let me read, one of the things that has been raised is, not everything is going to be a big storm. Not everything is going to be, for us, the Hurricane Harvey down here. A lot of this is just the day in and day out kind of street level flooding, the day in and day out management of, who knew, right, that COVID would come along. None of us did, but look what COVID's done to raise the focus on supply chains, right? And I will throw a little odd comment out and see if it is totally odd. But I think the supply chain issues have now raised the makerspace arena, where we now have the ability, and I'm not talking about, small desktop. I mean, I've seen some of the makerspace capabilities, the ability to create product in real time in a hyper local area. Are we seeing some of that part of this innovation come because we're needing to address things in a lot more faster, and to some degree in a lot of unknowns?
I would say yes. I think I would say a lot of these things, especially around supply chain, like you talked about, is we're at that the Paul kind of perspective of like, oh my God, there's this whole suite of problems that we did not realize. And I know it's not necessarily a resilience issue, but I was talking to some claim people on the auto side, and they're saying, $50,000 cars with like small amount of bumper damage, you can't get parts and you have to pay a rental car for 6 months. It's like, just total the car and sell the parts.
Right.
And it's like these problems that nobody thought of, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, how do we present these back? What do we even do? How do we have to manage it right now? So I think these things that were kind of like makerspace, whatever, it's out there, it's an innovation tactic. There all of a sudden is like, okay, the problem just got a whole lot worse. Like, we're gonna have to really explore this. So I think COVID and now some of these climate issues, people are definitely more willing than 3-5 years ago to think outside the box and collaborate and test some more bolder experiments to solve them, because the problems are getting bigger. It's, we were talking about war exclusions, like nobody cared about a war exclusion, but now it's like, well, maybe I should care. Like, I need insurance? It's like things that were like, you'd be laughed at like 2 weeks ago, and now like being discussed.
One of the other parts of unleashing innovation is something that has also been raised, and that is who's going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And again, I think what we have heard, whether it was with Brad Doxer and his work with the Urban Land Institute, or Howard Buffett talking about kind of a new impact model for rates of return. How do you all, and Jack, from your perspective of dealing on a public sector side, but Melissa, you, Paul, and Charlie, how do we now move the needle forward with engaging with investors, procurement decision makers, in a new approach to saying, Charlie, like what we just said, this is not about being cute. Yeah, we want to build the economy, and yes, we want entrepreneurship, and we, gung ho that we're being innovative. But this is really coming down to financial and economic significant gaps. How do we make that bridge to investors?
Just quick comment. I think you appeal to the portfolio kind of de-risking mentality that they already have. Say, look, at these are all maybe out there, but if you invest in all of us together as a portfolio of projects,
right,
some of these are going to pay off in a big way, and you're going to get a return, because they think in terms of return, and then you have to show that you can deliver, and keep working on it.
Quick comment, Paul.
Yeah, no, Charlie's right on. I think there's a lot of investor money sitting out there looking for good opportunities, and all of these problems potentially have viable business models around them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
So let me connect Jack, you and Melissa on this as well. On one hand, we're talking about, technology founders and emerging growth stage companies, but Melissa, you're working with very large corporate entities, Siemens and others. And, Jack, y'all deal with very large, suppliers. I don't think we have really talked about that. One of the roles here is for some of these technology companies to form strategic market opportunities with some of these larger companies, either as an investor, a strategic partner, potentially buying you out. So when you, Melissa, when you and Jack, as you talk with these larger vendors, how are they leveraging what you're going to be doing at the water tower for you all to help identify some of the next generation of companies that they should either purchase or partner with?
I think from my perspective, that's why a lot of organizations are here, right? Now, generally, it's the engineering firms that have the most interest. They want to see where that new tech is so they can take it to their next client. Right. I think my conversations with the larger corporations have really centered around their sustainability initiatives, which, as much as I'd love to believe that crosses the entire spectrum of the organization, it doesn't always. Sometimes it's just that little pet project. So if we could push, the greater conversation in that space, for me, it comes down to how do we, as an industry, and I struggle with this literally every day, show a return on investment. Right. If I was able to show that a smart meter, if placed in every neighborhood in the entire community, could reduce risk to the homeowners for flooding, to the insurance company because of no flooding, to the utility itself because of public perception problems and everything else that comes with that. If you can document that return on investment, then people would be all over this. It's because it doesn't warrant itself when we do these demos to really document that. It's hard. There's a lot of soft stuff in there.
Let me, Jack, before you jump in, you raised also a great point, and that is, I was thinking only of the corporate entities, but the engineering community plays a great role. I kind of knock heads periodically with the engineering community where, God love them, sometimes they are not the most open to innovation. And I'm saying that in a public setting. But the fact of the matter is that the engineers are the ones that can help write the specs, can help bring solutions to the marketplace. So again, one more part of this, I think what I'm, trying to tease out, all right, is that within the parameters of what we're calling investors and all, is the ability to work and partner with folks that strengthen your cost benefit analysis, your impact, right? Jack, so I come to you as an Office of Emergency Management with a budget, and I want to solve your biggest problems that are keeping you up at night, right? The first question that you ask is, where have you done this before? Boom, kills a lot of innovations out. Can these demonstration hubs, these demonstration pilots really help at least begin to solve some of that? Where have you done it before? Because that is one of the procurement hurdles.
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely. And that's one of the things that even when we're marketing our own sort of grant opportunities or funding opportunities, right? We don't draw a case study from Atlanta, right? Because everybody says, oh, they're big, they're huge. That doesn't represent us, right? And so, I think there's some strategy there that, obviously, I think Paul could talk to this point as well. But in terms of being strategic or prudent in identifying those pilots so as to hit the broadest breadth of that market, because then you're hitting across the board. And I think that's something that that we try to be very, very intentional about when we're sort of offering sort of case studies, whether that's loss avoidance, whether that's who else has, done this project type, in terms of individual sort of products or services. Obviously in the public sector, we tend to fall short of an endorsement, but of course we can flip them to, well, community X already did it, why don't you talk to them? And then I'd be happy to set up the email. So there certainly is a very tangible return on that approach, I think.
And what we're trying to do is to not formalize, but to establish a group of cities of different sizes to be part of the process early on. So as they know what's coming, and if something's being done here that may not work elsewhere, they can say that's going to work okay with a smaller community, but not in New York City or something. So we're trying to build that group, and that's very important. We're trying to do the same with investors too, which is also very important. So as to provide the conveyor belt, because we're not the center, we're sort of the start for a lot of these technologies, but they've got to go elsewhere in order to grow and thrive.
So let me throw one last request, and then I want to be mindful of time and share, what's coming up on the horizon and what are the next parts of the program. I always believe that whenever we do this, so what do I do now? What's one takeaway when I get back to my office, when I get in front of either my investors, the marketplace? What's one key message that people should take away from what we've talked about today? Melissa, and I'll just go, kind of back in order. Melissa, what's that one takeaway that I need to take from this that I should go implement?
Start at the other end.
Okay. Okay. All right.
I'll go if you want.
Okay, Charlie.
I think at the end of the day, innovation happens when you align money, ideas, talent, and data. If you can align those towards a purpose, well, and that's what I think all this is about. That's why we're together. We're aligning the talent. We're talking about money, and we're talking about the ideas, and then data. We didn't really talk about data, but everybody knows when you get into the nitty gritty, a lot of these things rely on data. So that's what I always think about, is how do you align them?
All right. So alignment. Paul?
I would echo what Charlie said, and my call to action is, if what you've heard, particularly from my perspective, what you heard from me, if you want to be a part of this, because we've got some money, we've got some ideas, we've got a test site, we can bring a lot of things together. If you got good, better ideas, or positive or negative criticism, let me know. I want to talk, and that's what's most important here. So let me hear it, and let's build the best thing we can.
Great. Jack, what's your one takeaway?
I would say the big one for the world where I'm in, I think this is on behalf of emergency management agencies everywhere. One's a call to action to my colleagues. Let's think more broadly. Let's really live in the pre-disaster and risk mitigation side of things, which is where we want to be, and not in response and recovery. And then to the partners at large, give us the benefit of the doubt that we can move forward in that direction, right? This climate resilience piece is coming one way or another. Whether it's painful or slightly less painful is the only point of discussion. But, don't let the old fashioned, even I said it myself, right? Public sector risk averse, find those champions, keep banging on the door, because somebody's going to listen, because again, it's happening, whether it's because, Moody's is going to make it a cost of capital conversation on municipal, bond issuance or what, but it's happening. So, we're here. Don't think that we're never going to answer the phone, because we're coming.
All right, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm going to let Charlie and Paul really focus on those early ideas, and my focus is really going to be on how do I get that message out to the user groups and get it commercialized and implemented on a grander scheme to to address the issues.
Yeah.
There's solutions out there now that we can't even
Right.
get them to buy into. So we got to focus
true.
in that space.
So
Help
I
me do
think,
that.
yeah, so I think a couple of the key takeaways, one is we need to bring all of the parties to the table, right? That's obvious, but we need to be aligned around something that's driven by, and I keep on saying it, it's either you're gonna, there's the carrot or the stick, and the stick is getting more and more expensive. It's gonna be a lot harsher if we don't start, so right now we've got a lot of opportunity to align the carrots the right way. We are continuing down our series of events leading up to hopefully being back in person in later April and in May. We will continue to share out all the information, including our upcoming event with Raghuveer, who leads one of the key program areas for Munich Re, one of the largest reinsurers. We have our federal panel coming together with representatives from Homeland Security, FEMA, SBA, and hopefully we will tie down our committed leader from the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development. We talked about ratings, and you raised Jack Moody's. We've got one of the key leaders of Fitch Ratings, which is one of the key rating services that from an incentivizing. And then we've mentioned data several times. So we've got a lot of great panels coming up over the balance of March and early April. We've set up this engagement platform, which is, I know, been a little bit challenging, but we are going to open it up, and I'm pleased to announce part of the announcement is that it looks like we have a sponsor who is interested in underwriting the forum, and therefore for the virtual part of this, we will need to have fees charged for the in-person events coming up, but it looks like we're going to be able to reduce or negate fees for participating in this virtual setting. And you can find all this information on the site accordingly. And we, of course, as I've said, recorded this and we'll make that available across all of our social media. So I want to thank Melissa, Jack, Paul, Charlie for your continued friendship and partnership and collaboration, and for especially today just opening up the real conversation about what are the assets that each of y'all have. I mean, this would be a missed opportunity if we don't put the word out that technology companies and investors have very solid, proven locations and organizations such as the ones that you all represent for us to form these partnerships. So I greatly appreciate everybody's time and effort. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.